Welcome to our part 2 on culture and consumerism. So this is our second part, and we are going to look about things like how culture is learned and talk about how we've studied this and the interaction. So three main ways that we learn culture is socialization, enculturation, and acculturation. So in essence is the ideas that you learn by observing, by modeling. So you get socialized when you learn and you internalize rules and patterns of society. So what's basically around you, your surroundings, what you see again at home, in the media. So like what you watch on television, what you see on your social media, on your tablet, on your computer, your neighbors, your peers, etc. Enculturation is when you learn and adopt norms and values from the culture. So it maybe originated from decades or hundreds of years prior, so things that have been brought down. So that's enculturation. And acculturation is assimilating norms and values from other cultures, and you see them more here in the US just because we have so many different people from all parts of the world. And in fact, we've heard people saying it's a mixed pot, mixed salad, not a melting pot, because when you say melting, it's erasing people's culture, and the idea is it's a mixture of culture. We have this kind of combination of all three when it comes to learning what is expected of you. The idea is, in enculturation is learning your own culture versus acculturation, again, learning a new culture. So, and you do see a little bit of that here because, again, we have so many people from different parts of the globe making America their home. Now, remember, material and non-material. So the non-material includes symbols, values, norms. So these aren't laws that are written out. These aren't things that are necessarily explained in detail. You just know them. So things that are symbolic. So like the peace sign, right? That's symbolic. So when someone gives you that peace sign, like the image I show you on the slide, you know what that means, right? Peace. But if you're new and new to this country and you don't know about that, you might be like, what, number two? Is that two? What does that mean? So symbols, hand gestures, things like that. Values, what's important, what's meaningful, and we'll talk a lot about that. And norms, unwritten rules of what's acceptable and not unacceptable. So, you do things sometimes that aren't necessarily against the law, but they're not the norm. I took it out, but I had a picture of Lady Gaga's dress, a meat dress, just slabs of meat. That's not typical. Norms and culture, so there's inactive, crescive, there's conventions, customs, and mores. So please read up on these in order to keep this lecture not too long. You can read up on this, but just realize not everything's written out and expected like a law. There are things that are expected, but it's more subtle. Some are more subtle, some are more explicit, like an enacted norm is explicit. It's very obvious, and there's other things that are they're embedded, they're more subtle, mainly recognized by people that members of that society, and people that aren't members would be totally new to that. So all different types of norms are a part of the culture. Just for the sake of time, I gave you the link so you can take a look at this. If you're an Office fan, I love The Office. It's a great show. It's a small little short snippet of they notice that a coworker isn't noticing something that he should have noticed. So they said, is he not paying attention to anything? So they tried changing things and doing things that are really out of the ordinary, like having another coworker dress as another coworker, or someone without a shirt but wearing a tie, and just all these different kind of bizarre kooky things, and he's not noticing it. But the one thing he noticed was that it was 5 o'clock and it was time to go home. So take a look at that. I love that little clip. It's really funny. Just know that certain standards can change. And I keep saying this, it's not static. It does change. So for example, tattoos. They were designed for affiliation and to stand out, be rebellious. But something like that, if everyone does it, like tattoos, everyone has gotten a tattoo almost, it turns it into something ordinary. When the West Covina Mall has a tattoo parlor, and they did for a short period of time, you know that everyone pretty much has a tattoo. So these are words to know. These are like subculture, counterculture, mainstream, and I know you know these terms, but just in case, just to make sure that you understand what we mean, because I'll be using these terms a lot, the subculture, the counterculture, and mainstream. So just make sure you read up on these just to make sure that you understand. Now, how we look at cultural dimension, we refer back to Hofstede's dimensions of culture, cultural dimensions. This is developed by a Dutch psychologist, and he basically set up this framework perceive society and how we adapt to our society. It originally was with 4 dimensions and added 2. So now it's a total of 6 dimensions. It was originally 4, but it's power distance index, individualism versus collectivism, masculinity versus femininity, uncertainty avoidance, long-term orientation versus short-term normative orientation, and indulgence versus restraint. In terms of power distance, the idea is the extent in which less powerful members within a country expect and accept the power is distributed equally. So not everyone we have equal rights, but the power, some people have more influence and more power than others. That's every society that has ever existed. If it has high power distance, it just means there typically has one person with power. And if it's lower power distance, it means it's a little bit more equally distributed. If it's lighter, it's a higher number. If it's a lighter color, it's a lower number. If it's a darker color, it's considered a large high power distance. There's more distance between the person that has power and those that don't. Now, individualism versus collectivism. Our culture here in the U.S. is really big on individualistic. The idea is that that you identify an individual as her own, and the idea is that you really focus on be the best that you can be, and things that it's about you, and the focus is you, your happiness, your general well-being, and that means the ties between individuals tend to be a little bit looser. Collectivism is more, it's what's best for the group, right? The collective group. And the idea is that a society in which individuals from birth onward are integrated, and it's a very cohesive in-group. So you tend to have people more working as a collective versus it's more individualistic. So if it's considered an individual culture, and we definitely are, not all countries are like that. A lot of them cultures are based on collectivism, masculine and feminine, and we're not talking about gender identity. We're talking about as a country, as a culture. Masculinity is considered strong in sex role differentiation, and that there are distinct gender roles. When it's considered a feminine culture, it's considered societally weak form of sex role differentiation, meaning there's less differentiation and that you have more gender roles overlapping rather than being different. So those that are considered more masculine, Japan, Italy, Mexico, China, and US, and those that are considered low masculine cultures are Netherlands, Denmark, and Thailand. So you can see the reference. Uncertainty avoidance, the extent that people from different cultures will take or accept ambiguous situations and tolerate uncertainty because, the risk level. And some have high uncertainty avoidance and others have low. So if it's low, greater willingness to take risks and less resistance to change. And high uncertainty avoidance, they basically focus more on security, less on risk. And you'll see less endeavors that could risk, losing money or, things that are more risk oriented. Long-term versus short-term. So long-term, the idea is that you're looking more into the future. So you're willing to put in kind of the work early on and not reap the rewards immediately. You're thinking the payoff's going to be later on. And you have to kind of really push on perseverance, right? Thrift and changing circumstances because the payoff will come in the end. Short-term orientation is when they're looking more at the virtues of that particular society and really looking at past and the present. So things like national pride, tradition, preservation of faith, and fulfilling social obligations, things that they feel are obligations. So tradition, social hierarchy, social obligations versus long-term is more persistence, perseverance, saving, being able to adapt. Okay, so those that are more long-term oriented are countries of East Asia, Netherlands, and short-term like European and American countries, and like the Philippines. Indulgence and restraint, when you're really looking at more like gratification, is an indulgent society, and restraint they'll suppress or delay gratification with very, very much stricter social norms. And the idea is more about having fun. So guess what? Where we lie. Obviously, we're definitely more indulgent, and you can see Mexico, Nigeria, Sweden, Australia. These are more indulgent. These are the ones that are more, these are the countries that are more restrained. So France, Japan, Germany, Italy, India, and China. Overall rankings, you can take a look at this, but we're fairly low on the power distance. I don't know if everyone would agree with that, but we're fairly low compared to other cultures. We are one of the most individualistic, for sure. I think we could all agree on that. Masculine, we're almost in the halfway point. We are driven by competition, achievement, success, kind of winner takes all type of thing. uncertainty avoidance. There's a fair degree of acceptance for new ideas. We tend to see some openness there in the ideas that willing to try new and different things. And we've definitely gone up there because if you look at the history of things like the invention of the telephone and some other inventions, people were a little bit slower to adapt to it and accept it. Now we're much quicker at accepting new ideas and kind of new technology and things like that. So long-term orientation, we're kind of low. We have a strong idea of what's good. We tend to have a strong idea about what's good and evil, but we tend to measure performance on short-term perspectives, definitely. Overall, just note that the culture helps determine consumers' overall priorities, right? So what activities and what products you use and what you like to participate in. Granted, it's your taste and your personality and your traits, but how is that shaped? You have to look at your environment. So things like if you like cosmetics, you'll look more into the beauty bloggers and the influencers and the magazines and the tutorials on makeup and all that. And if you're into bodybuilding, then it's about body image and supplements. And it's like if you know anyone in that arena, that's all they do. Pictures of themselves flexing in the mirror. And we look at what we consider beautiful because standards of beauty are different in other different cultures. Body comportment, how we carry ourselves, how we walk, sit. Some places are more informal, some places are more formal. They have stricter codes of conduct. We'll talk about that. Food culture. Food has different meanings, and we use food, dining isn't it time to get together. Others are a way of showing respect. Others, it's for other purposes. So, yeah, it's all relative. I talk about that. Make sure you read this on ethnocentrism and cultural relativism, because the idea is that, your perspective, I'm sorry, it's overlapping, gotta fix that. Your own perspective versus someone else's perspective. And sometimes you run into that ethnocentrism where you believe one group or culture is superior to all. That's ethnocentric, and you want to avoid that. Obviously, that's not a positive thing, but a lot of people do have that, or whether they're aware of it or not. Cultural relativism, and we hear that term more today than we ever have, and the idea is that moral or ethical systems, which do, again, vary, I keep mentioning that, vary from culture to culture, can be understood and judged only in the relation of cultural context, which is a peer, so cannot judge. You can't, one's not better than the other. People will debate this. Not everyone agrees on that. Some people say there are standards of good and bad. It can't just be all cultural relativism. So different opinions. I really need to stress in this class, I'm not here to tell you what to think. I give you tools and the information. You make up your mind. I'm not here to tell you how you're supposed to think, because I find that I'm a strong believer in education helping you get tools. I'm not here to persuade you to think one way or the other. So that's really important. I'm very strong about that. Just know it's a two-way street. Products do well when they they work to service what the culture wants, but just realize also new products, innovations, things that are new can shape current ideals and change things. What I mentioned about originally some inventions weren't cultural lag. That's aspects of culture change more quickly than others, and sometimes they're not willing to accept it. Every country, I think, has that a little bit. We have it a little bit less now than we did before, and we have it less than compared to other cultures. But just realize material culture tends to change and update much more rapidly than non-material culture. And lastly, I just go over what a myth and a ritual is, so make sure you read this, but just know there's different rituals and things. They're connected to like daily rituals, like your everyday actions, things that could be anywhere from religious, like a baptism, or rites of passage like marriage or graduation. It could be cultural, like a holiday. It could be a Chinese New Year, or it could be Thanksgiving, or a group, like a business negotiated, like a merger. And family, it could be a birthday, and personal, like grooming, household. And that's why in your journal you have your assignment to read up on another tribe, a specific daily ritual of a Nasirama tribe, because it talks in detail of their daily rituals, and that way you can compare to your daily rituals and see how they compare, if you see if any similarities or differences. And it's really up to you to see if you see them or not. But I'll tell you, most successful companies, they're all based, they have a historic basis. Their logos or their overall name is often based on a myth or a ritual. So there's a history behind it, a story behind it. And lastly, when we look at items, so material items, just realize sometimes the material and the non-material kind of converge. You need to know these terms, sacred and profane consumption. So sacred is related to special objects, objects that are out of the ordinary. So these are what you would consider sacred items. Profane consumption is related to objects that are part of that everyday life. A spoon, a fork is a profane consumption. It's like just everyday. It's not special. Something for like a wedding or something for a rite of passage. Now there are times where you can sacrifice something and you can get something that is profane, right? Profane consumption, like a jersey is just a regular jersey. However, if you have the players all sign it, autograph it, then it becomes sacred because now you're adding value to it. And it's just signatures, right? Technically, the signature itself is not, but it's the fact, what it symbolizes. The players sign that jersey. It's a signed jersey, and that gives it, and people will like not wash it and they'll frame it. And unwashed signed football jersey is a great example of that. So sometimes we turn something that's profane consumption into something sacred. And we desacralize. So we'll take like the flag that's supposed to be symbolic and we'll put it in print on something and turn it into something that's everyday. That's profane. The Eiffel Tower, and you get the Eiffel Tower lamp. We're taking something that's very sacred to others and we're turning it into everyday items. So it goes both ways. So that's why you'll hear me say that a lot. It's a two-way street. So it's what's the value you put on things, right? So that's important because it varies from culture to culture. And that value is going to vary whether you're willing to spend money on it or willing to use it or not. So that gives you a background. So I want you to start thinking about what you typically buy, what you typically use, and that plays into your daily consumption. All right, that concludes our lecture. Thanks for listening.